it's very interesting to trace, perhaps especially in Norway, because it's not that common, or in Northern Europe, to trace back where the politics come from, because it's I've heard criticism of this channel and
who did that?
of saying, oh, but don't be so obsessed with Immanuel Kant and Hegel, for instance, and tracing all the vices to them. But it's very important to do that, I think, of course in a critical manner, but to manage to trace back where it comes from. They have a much stronger tradition in other countries to do that. For instance, in the US, they are very concerned with who or what thinkers the founding fathers were inspired by.
Yes.
And most founding fathers were very inspired by Adam Smith. Hamilton and Jefferson, for instance, read very much Adam Smith, and you can see differences in how they treat politics. Although it has evolved, but you can find this moral aspect from Immanuel Kant. Although we don't refer to him today. Or we don't even, the state doesn't even refer to morality when it comes to cultural politics, but it's there.
Yeah.
They call it to be free, that the art should be free. But then you see that it's just certain kinds of expressions that are tolerated as being a kind of freedom. Yeah. If you express these kind of opinions, if you ridicule through your work, you ridicule this or this politician, then it's an expression of artistic freedom. But if you criticize through your work another kind of politician, or
leftist politicians.
Yes, leftist politicians, or some things that you're not supposed to touch upon, like for instance now the corona virus. If you touch
or
upon
something
that,
about climate or whatever.
Yeah, or climate, some things that are untouchable, then you don't reach, or then you don't have the same moral approach to your art, and then it's not regarded as something that should be supported. But it's called something else. But you can trace it back to, as you said, it was a very interesting quote by Dreskov.
Yeah. And I think that there's so many things, because I have some experience. I was invited once, or I've been to some discussions, and for example, I was on Norwegian television once. And there was she wasn't the culture minister then, but she had been from the Labour Party, and she was so concerned with how you have to support the daring art, the sort of the one that what do you call it, challenges you, and all those cliches, right? And then I just looked at her, and this little power sick mouse was saying that if you vote for me, you will get money back. And this is what you call inside trading, in when it comes to business. And that was just so revolting, that there is this political activism in it that gets money, right? Because then we're going back to Hegel, I think you made a good point, or we talked about it before we started, so I think that should be included here, that Kant lies the foundation for the whole sort of metaphysics and epistemology, how these things can be established. But then Hegel is like the activist here, and that's the problem, that the political activism comes in, and that's what gets state support. So it's like hidden political propaganda, and there's an interesting situation. Well, you published my poem on the Norwegian Culture Council in the Civilization, and where I said they should be buried or executed. but that was a part of that Squander Commission, which he's basically a theater guy and celebrated modern artist in Norway, who wanted me to be a part of this. And that was interesting because he has done something where he actually, not because of state politics, but it is funded by the state, but because he has some interest in really sort of going into so-called difficult conversations, and he's been accused of being a racist and all kinds of stuff because of that. Then he wants to discuss whether the state politics should be, or the state should be involved in cultural politics. And then you get these woke people that get the Culture Council to make a seminar just to talk about how he is a racist and alt-right or whatever, and then they get like 3 minutes to reply. You know, like Iraq, when Colin Powell was saying that they had a lot of weapons, then Iraq at the end gets 7 minutes to defend themselves after he's been talking for 45 minutes or whatever. And I guess that's just going all over the place here. But that's the problem here, that you get these I shouldn't say parasites, so I won't say it, that come in and exploit that the state has that definitional power, that normative power, and they use that politically.
Yeah, and it's and that is also what has happened with I use the word moral, that there is some kind of a morality that you have to fulfill to be worthy of the state support. Yeah. But it's a wrong choice of words to say morality, because it should be more or it is ideology.
Yes.
It's not, but it comes from the idea of something being moral, but then it has turned into becoming rather not something that is, I would argue, very thought through moral. It's not something that you can argue that is moral, but it's rather something that fits within this ideology. And so it's even hard to imagine whether a state-supported culture politics can become anything other than propaganda.
Yeah, because that's the question. I want to hear what you think about that. Because ideally I would speak from a sort of purely libertarian perspective. But of course we know the situation is as it is, and you have to deal with that and not just build a dream castle and then just go out of the discussion, because then you don't get to do anything, right? You have to sort of try to change it a bit as it is. But I've been thinking about that. Let's suppose that the state Tresco, or like we had, I really enjoyed that conversation we had on Schweigor, another Norwegian who lives in France and wrote about especially Hegel and how you can just invent things, and because you can imagine it, then it's true, and the extremely destructive influence that has, which is being implemented with state money in the cultural field, right? But let's say that what was supported was, we sort of move one part from history here. We also talked about Titian's concern with the poetics in an earlier conversation, right? So let's say that happens now, and then Tresco is Aristotelian, has read the poetics, and he wants this to be, the guiding principle. And then you get a culture politics based on Aristotle. Would that still be okay? Or could that also be corrupted? Because you can just throw in some things there. What about Parthenon, for example? State project. And we go there and we just think it's amazing. Or you can talk about the Sixtine Chapel or whatever, which is, I guess also a state project because it's its own state. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm not Not completely sure about it, because it's you can always make these examples of, well, but see, in this country the state went in and saved the opera performances. That's the very typical example, because in general people don't go to operas, they go to rock concerts and they go to other popular events, and therefore we need the state to support opera performances and ballet and everything. And from those single examples, then the principle is taken to
justify
everything.
any kind of intervention.
And it's hard to I think, although it's just an idea that I'm still in the process of thinking through, but I think it can be explained by including some kind of morality or some kind of moral philosophy, and it relates a bit to what you said. You have said earlier about the moral difference between selling a work, a classical figurative work that is made over a time span of 1 year or 2 years, and it's sold for less than a modernistic artwork that is made on 1 day or something like that. And maybe you want to expand on that point.
I'm happy that you remind me of that, because I think that's a crucial point. Then we go back to one thing that I've been concerned with all along when I've talked about cultural politics is not to go into that, just to preface, is not to go into that libertarian, what do you call it, trap, where you say, oh, they get so much money from the state, and they can say, well, I got $10,000 all last year, and of course, and then there's someone who gets $300,000, suddenly, but those are not the majority. So it's not like you get filthy rich from state politics, cultural politics, but the state, if you think about it from above, what the state does is to go in and educate the children, educate in art schools, art historians, art critics, whatever, and they buy art, they conserve art, they exhibit art, they send art abroad, they write about art. You have press support where you have the press reviewing art exhibitions, and so it's not that they're completely they don't have complete monopoly, but they're extremely dominant. So that leads the audience, the buyers, also in that direction. And he talks about that in his book. From the very beginning, coming to the point, I promise. From the very beginning, in a situation where we could say, okay, this is good, because you have the academies in the late, established in the late 18th century and then onwards into the 19th century, where they learned craft and things were good, classical painting. But then you have the situation where those who painted in that way, sort of classicist academic way, they got the grants or were sent abroad. And when they were sent abroad or exhibited in this public renowned institutions or spaces, they also got private customers visiting them, because it had, all the PR said that these were great painters. And then you can ask, well, what about this? Well, what about Lars Hartevig, or this sort of strange people that were working that no one's heard about, that didn't get that possibility, right? And so the state supports that, gives that state stamp of approval, and the worst thing is that when these foundational ideas from Kant and Hegel really sort of blossom with modernism and conceptualism, all these things, then you get the situation where those who work this much get $50,000 and those who work this much get $5,000. And just morally speaking, Because and people who are on the left should be able to understand that this, if we transport it from the field of culture or art onto, for example, some kind of remedy that you would need at home, where things are produced in a factory, it goes like that. And then there's some poor farmer in Peru or whatever who spends 1 week working on it and has to be a slave of the evil capitalist system because he cannot compete with the price of the factory, right? Then you can say, okay, leftists always then react to and say that is immoral, right? You have these rich guys, you can just get things produced, like a modern artist today can get a lot of figurative painters to work for him and sort of just churn out work. And then you have that one person in his studio alone working for a half a year, and then he gets $5,000 for it. And that is the kind of system that state politics supports, right? And so that's where I'm thinking, and I have my little eye here, my third eye, focused on your Adam Smith there. I've been thinking about, and this is where I want to hear what you say now. I consider myself a capitalist because I would like to have a market where I can trade freely, and therefore I don't like the state to come in and sort of say, no, go here, buy there, buy here, don't buy that guy. I want to be able to compete evenly. But I see that industrial capitalism is not my friend. Because that favors the mass production that you can do as a modern artist, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah.
What would Smith think about it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know what he would think about it. I'm definitely not an expert in Adam Smith, but he has some points that I've been inspired by lately. And at first I read somewhere that I don't remember exactly where, but that he had said something in the effect of that if something is made, something is a product that is a kind of a virtuous product, something that has been produced.
That takes a lot of knowledge to produce.
Yes.
I mean, essentially that is difficult to make, or
he at least the way I read it was that there is some kind of connection between morality and the market. Okay. Although it's generally discussed how they are in conflict, the theory of moral sentiments on the one side and the wealth of nations on the other side, where the theory of moral sentiments is about making a moral philosophy that is based on sympathy, that you have this, or empathy as we perhaps would call it today, that you have these moral sentiments towards the other, you put yourself in the other. You identify with. Yeah, you identify with the other, you put yourself in that position, and you regard how would I react in that position, and then using this impartial spectator, trying to have a neutral view on it, not in a moral sense, but just trying to have a neutral view and then see whether it is a good moral action or not. And he also says that it is in the base of humans, although we do act on self-interest, there is some part of that self-interest that is concerned with the other. How the other. That's in
your self-interest. Yeah. You'd like to be together with other people, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And but then the wealth of nations is perceived as being more just regarding the self-interest. But then there is this connection that I've heard of. I need to find the exact quote, but whether he has written it or not, it's just an interesting thought. That connection that. It is more not valuable, but it's more wanted in a market if it is made morally, if something is made morally. or virtuously. But then you can think, well, but what then about your example with paintings that take 1 day to make? I would say it's a pretty simple argument to show that it doesn't sound like the definition of justice. That someone goes through a school that takes years to learn a skill and use that skill to create something with the goal of making someone's life better. And it's a painting that takes 2 years to make, and it's sold for way less of a price than something that is made on random 1 day, and it does not have the goal of making someone's life better. It's a pretty simple argument it doesn't sound like justice. But then I've been thinking maybe, I'm not saying that Adam Smith thought this, but he could have a point that there are these times where that trends or fashion or something like that could create kind of a bubble of something that is popular within a market, but it's not sustainable. If you regard all the crafts and all the positions through history, which ones have survived? It's carpentry. It's also the classical painter, and it's the architect who has built beautiful buildings, and
clothes.
Yes,
things we need to survive.
Clothes and prostitutes have survived. And so this is not regarded as, but I would argue that all those jobs or position or trades have survived, or one could argue that they have survived because they do offer something that, not only do they offer something that people want, because that can change, but they also offer something that people in general respect. It's something that has some kind of virtue to it. It's carpentry. It's something that takes skill. It's something that takes labor, that you have to work to actually produce something. It's not something that you just throw out and it's there. And that could be an argument that for something to really have to be popular in a market over a long time in a society, how a market in a society survives, it needs to have this kind of moral element to it, because if not, it can easily be, or it will after some time be discovered that this is like, why am I paying for this? And it could take a long time, but like in modern art, that people are paying for something that is not made out of virtue. And same with the tulip fever, is that what it's called in the Netherlands?
In the 17th century.
There was a market for tulips. And that's a fact. It was a large market for it. But it wasn't something that in general was made out of virtue.
If you want to see the entire segment, head over to caveofapilles.com/subscribe and become a $5 patron today. Watch all our conversations or shuffle through the Cave of Apilles audio playlist by becoming a member today at caveofapilles.com/subscribe.